the pursuit of autonomy, or that is the software that we use to integrate disparate hardware into a symphony of destruction with less deliberate human involvement, is a necessary facet of modern warfare. We have to do it, but I think that I want us to acknowledge along the way this troubling unspoken reality that we seek autonomous warfare, in part at least, because our confidence in the institution of the military is gone. The prevailing wisdom of U.S. policy in relation to the war between Russia and Ukraine the last few years is the belief that direct U.S. involvement on the front lines is some sort of ace in the hole that Russia wants to avoid, and perhaps that we want to avoid too. But nonetheless, the belief goes that Ukraine's infantry brigades are mired in the slog of trench warfare, but surely the 82nd Airborne and the 2nd Cavalry Regiment would roll back Russian battlefield gains in a matter of weeks. Sadly, though, and until perhaps the previous few months of the second Trump administration, the U.S. military's preparedness to fight a conflict like the ones on the front lines between Russia and Ukraine, I think is in question. Hypothetically, and I think credibly, the insertion of U.S. forces on the front lines in Donetsk, for example, would produce mass casualty events and a calamity for months until we could adjust to the pace of technological change and the nature of war in the 21st century. This is because U.S. military resources and power, as they are composed now and as we understand them, do not equate to battlefield victory, much less strategic relevance, in the era of the change of battlefield geometry and battlefield algebra. Battlefield geometry is the orchestration of space, time, and weapons to destroy our enemy before he has a chance to destroy us. The infantry combat of the Russia-Ukraine war started 3 kilometers and in. As soon as Russian tanks drew within range of Ukrainian defenders, they could strike with Javelin anti-tank missiles. Again, about within 3 kilometers range. Mounted cannons and even light machine gun fire. This was a traditional and comparatively simple effort of offense and defense that would have been familiar to any U.S. infantry battalion conducting pre-deployment training. But in late 2022, 19-year-old drone racing league pilots and select U.S. government benefactors changed battlefield geometry with unmanned drones that replicate the kinetic effects of a javelin at more than 10 times the distance. Nearly overnight, tanks, troops, and radar systems fell under lethal threat of frontline enemy formations before they were within 12 miles of each other, not just less than 2. The threat was transformative, and now over 80% of casualties on both sides of the front lines are due to attritable one-way attack drones. Again, that's battlefield geometry. Battlefield algebra is gaining purchase too. While it makes good sense to kill a $7 million Russian Armata tank with a $250,000 Javelin missile, the attritable drone is redefining the economics of war. For less than $2,500, and that's for an NDA-compliant secure supply chain U.S. model, a first-person view drone can have the same destructive effect on a tank as a Javelin missile for 1/100th of the cost. This is an equation to which the U.S. military and our defense industrial base seem almost allergic. Getting battlefield algebra right, though, that is, to kill more expensive enemy things with fewer of your cheap things, is the essential task of the defense innovation industry in the 21st century. And it will be the charge of U.S. military commanders in any future conflict. This will first be possible with exceptional software that unites and integrates the deployment of simple, functional, and attritable weapons at scale. But the question for this audience to ponder is if U.S. decision makers are invested enough in the future to learn the lessons of software and hardware without the forcing function of war. Learning such critical lessons, as Sham Sankar says, left of bang, should start with an end to U.S. efforts to try and predict the future. Now let me explain. The American military's effort to operate at the speed of modern conflict is best typified by these replicator initiatives. Meant to expedite acquisition cycles and speed the delivery of relevant weapons to the force, Replicator is a failure of supposed defense innovators trying on a costume of speed and iteration. Multiple thousands of Switchblade, loitering munitions, small drones, and unmanned boats were supposed to be in the hands of military units today. In actuality, only a few hundred total systems have reached the operator, and this abysmal failure is because the military has come to think that transformation happens with pet projects and quote-unquote innovation program offices. What is needed instead is a complete reconsideration of the institution of the American military itself. Let's return to the study of the battlefield in Ukraine. It's not a perfect match for wars in the future. Potential wars in the Pacific, for example, could and will look much different. But it is a use case in the kind of organizations that can live and fight in reality without the dead weight of defense industrial habits. In late 2024, radio frequency jamming began to disrupt the uncontested dominance of drones. By December, Russia, in response, started to field fiber optic drones, essentially a 10-kilometer spool of fiber optic cable connected to the bottom of a drone that flies more or less uncontested amidst really complicated electronic warfare environments. This was not just a battlefield display of soldier ingenuity, but it was an impetus for both the Ukrainian and Russian industrial bases to wholesale change and deliver fiber optic capability to the front lines in a matter of months. And by this summer, near daily social media videos can show layers upon layers of this fiber optic cable stretching across the Ukrainian countryside, glistening in the sun. A U.S. drone company has just delivered the first American-made fiber optic drone, but we're still missing a demand signal to make production relevant and possible for businesses trying to be a part of this kind of revolution in America. And this is kind of the problem of predicting the future. For some, the U.S. has predetermined the nature of the next war, almost as if we are eager to spill American blood at the next possible chance, and we're innovating until we have the exact systems we think we will need with the exact specifications that are necessary for battlefield effects based on the establishment's war games and simulations. As the justification goes, it will be useless to build at scale until we can get the American concept and our prediction of future war exactly perfect. This, perhaps obviously, is foolish. The nature of drones and attritable systems, the cheap ones that are making a difference on the modern battlefield, means that we can order enough to justify a new future for American defense manufacturing without wasting industrial needs. To build tens of thousands of FPVs, companies do not need exquisite manufacturing lines like you do for an F-35. A factory that builds a 10-inch FPV drone can build one-way attack systems that fly 300 nautical miles or counter UAS interceptors the next year. But there will be no business to build these kinds of systems before, let's say, 2027, if we don't make the investment in a foundational industrial footprint today in 2025. To build 10,000 drones, even if they, God willing, never see combat, is not a waste, but it is the guarantee of training supplies for the 101st Airborne, and it's the assurance that American workers and factories will exist to build and are ready to build once it is time to fight. The need for the U.S. military to understand and even operate like a private enterprise is not for the government to hire uniformed software engineers to build government-owned software. That's, as far as I'm concerned, a feckless waste of time and money for another speech. But it is to ask us to make the investments that would once be considered too risky. But sadly, and this is perhaps a takeaway, we should not be surprised that our military leadership class is completely unaccustomed and unsuited to meet this moment. This is the same lineage of leaders who would testify in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee every 6 months for over 20 years that victory in Iraq and Afghanistan was 6 months, $10 billion, and 10,000 more troops away. This is the same lineage of uniform officers who, for example, at Peterson Air Force Base just last year, had diversity boards of the top Black, Hispanic, and female officers who they would need to promote before any white men. This is the same lineage of uniformed officers who would award $2,000 to the top Navy drag queen on the USS Roosevelt aircraft carrier while deployed in the Asia Pacific. Let's not forget that technical overmatch and exquisite software do not in themselves defend the American interest. The foolish thing would be to expect success from a military establishment that has given the nation so little in terms of interest. This is not, of course, to say anything of the sacrifice on the battlefield, but has given us so little in the last 25 years. The pursuit of defense technology and a mindset of innovation that leaves the military ready for future war before it happens requires a wholesale reconsideration of the arrangement of the U.S. military as an organization. People need to be fired, hundreds more still, as far as I'm concerned. Private companies have had people in Ukraine seeing the burst and the onset of fiber optic FPVs come onto the scene at business risk, not at the direction of the U.S. federal government. Companies like Vector, companies like Saronic are doing the same thing in the manufacturing domain, buying shipyards because of a privately fueled understanding that it is shipyards we need today, so we are ready for war later. This pace of change, purely privately fueled, can only last for so long. Private capital markets can only be so patient. For probably 1/50th of the price of the infamous CHIPS Act, the Pentagon could stimulate a drone industry in America for multiple companies for generations. An investment that would build a manufacturing base to employ Americans ready for the pace of battlefield innovation, even if those factories produce different drones today than they do 18 months from now. But there still exists a sense that this would not be enough. Even if Congress opened the purse and even if the Pentagon signed contracts faster than it ever has, the results would still be trapped of the same committees and program offices. What America faces is not a shortage of money or engineers, but a shortage of organizational relevance. Our military has lived on the assumption that it will fight on its own terms, with time to prepare and with weapons no one else can match. That assumption is gone, and now that there are drones that cost less than a used car that can destroy tanks, the world is different. The side that learns fastest and builds fastest will win. But under the current framework, Army Ranger machine gunners use their own money to buy training equipment because there is the frontline conviction that to lean on the Army bureaucracy is to surrender any relevance or capacity. Part of the problem is that we expect the military to stay ahead of the threat, source responses to the threat, and then confront the threat at land, sea, or air. Oh, and then, by the way, build a business analytics platform too, Sergeant. What we need is something new. Perhaps a privatized branch of the American military, not a loose network of contractors feeding the same old Pentagon, but a real fighting force under congressional charter. Its mission is simple: take the best of American industry, take the best of the American heartland, the speed of private enterprise, and the urgency of the modern battlefield to build, design, and field weapons without waiting for the glacial pace of procurement. When Ukrainian fighters lash fiber optic cable to drones to beat Russian jammers, an American privatized corps could observe, copy, and deliver the same to our soldiers within weeks. When our enemies experiment with new unmanned boats in the Black Sea, this corps could put American versions in the water before their next patrol. When American private enterprise seek the protection of assets and resources in Central Africa, this corps can meet the challenge. We need a reconsideration of the institution of the American military. Gone is the myth that the military is a bastion of industrial excellence and professional merit. The race quotas that started at West Point in 1965, the logic that led us to choose a chief of naval operations because she was a woman, are not unrelated to the inability of the Navy to build more than one submarine per year, or the fact that the Army spends $250 million on drones based on requirements written 6 years ago. This is a decades-long rot that will not go away with a cleanse of AI, autonomy, and robots. A true remedy looks like the application of the revolutionary zeal that many at this conference have turned on the university system, the media, and the federal bureaucracy. It is time to build something distinct, and the military should be next on our list. Thank you.